Hey folks, very exciting show today here on the Unconventional Wealth Show. Of course, I'm Coach Pete. I'm joined with Mike Conlon. We're going to talk about the 5 biggest mistakes that people make when they buy mobile home parks. Stay tuned. It's a great show. Well, folks, welcome in. Again, the Unconventional Wealth Show is your weekly show looking inside the different aspects of the real estate world. And today, we're going to look at the 5 biggest mistakes that are made when buying a mobile home park. I'm, of course, Coach Pete, and I'm joined with Mike Conlon, a multimillionaire investor. Mike, welcome in.
Hey, Coach Pete, thanks for having me.
Yeah, now let's look at this. I mean, it's exciting time when you buy something, but
Absolutely.
a lot of times you overlook some of the drawbacks when you're buying, don't you?
Yeah, it's, mobile home park industry has gotten a real hot place, right, because of the cash flow and things like that. I was just at a convention in Chicago we were talking about, and, things have gotten to be a little bit overheated,
right.
And I think you just need to be careful. It's a harder business to run than people think.
So people were doing the research, and they want to buy. Number one, they make sure they have enough cash flow and money to buy a park, right?
Yeah.
And then they walk the site. What are some of the things they overlook when they're doing that site walk before they buy a park?
Well, I think the biggest issue, and probably the hardest issue as well, is the infrastructure. And the biggest problem with the infrastructure, it's below the ground, very hard to check out beforehand and do your due diligence. You can do a lot of different things, but you never really know until you get in there. And even if it's public utilities, which is public water and sewer, you're still responsible for those pipes as a mobile home park owner. So you really need to have a best estimate of what that's going to cost you if you have to upgrade it or fix it or whatever.
So anything that's inside the park that you're buying,
correct,
is your responsibility.
Absolutely.
Now, when we look at the homeowners, like your own house, you're responsible for anything in your yard, I guess, aren't you? Or is it when it hits your house?
When it hits your house, basically.
Okay.
So anything,
that's a big difference then.
Yeah, anything underneath the ground, pipe-wise, the owner's responsible for. And I think that's the biggest issue facing the industry right now is a lot of newbies are getting in and they don't understand how expensive that can be. If you got to redo a whole, water sewer system, it could be $500,000 to $1 million.
Now I was watching the show on Discovery Network where they go looking for gold. They're looking for gold out there, and
Okay.
they were using drones to fly over the land, and the drones had sonar to check on what's going on underneath the land.
Very cool.
Is that a possibility these days to check that without digging up every single pipe?
Yeah.
Would that be a possibility for a mobile home park?
That certainly could be. Obviously, new technologies.
Technology is amazing, by the way.
Yeah, and hopefully that keeps solving problems. And you got to remember, with most mobile home parks, they were built in the 70s and 80s. So you're talking infrastructure that's 40, 50 years old, and that stuff's going to corrode, and especially tree limbs growing through some of the pipes and things like that. So it's a big issue.
So public utilities would be considered water, electricity too, right? You
Correct.
check the electric lines, and are
Yeah.
you also responsible inside the park for your electric?
Absolutely,
lines?
yeah. Everything's
Those kind of things.
Duke Energy will typically fix everything, and a lot of the older parks have overhead lines, so it's not as big an issue. But really, it's the water sewer pipes that are their biggest issue. And obviously, when you go into the private utilities, when you're talking about wastewater treatment plants or septics, that's a whole nother issue, and you really need to hire experts, especially in your due diligence phase, to get them in there and look at those things.
I was going to say, now, if you're looking at a mobile home park that's out of the city limits, might not get the city water, right?
Correct.
And won't get the city sewer.
Yeah.
So they have probably giant septic tanks. They have
Yeah.
one big one for the whole park, or does each home have their own one?
Usually it's 2 homes per septic tank,
Okay.
so there's a bunch of septic tanks. But you got to make sure, the biggest thing with septics is you have to make sure there's enough land available, raw land available within your park. If one of those fails, you need a whole nother septic field. And so you're going to need some room to do that. If the houses are really packed together and they have septic, I would avoid it at all cost.
My grandfather had a septic tank back in the day, and that's where he put his garden, by the way. Green is they grew pretty fast, too.
Exactly.
I'm going to leave all those jokes aside there on
Yeah.
that one. Now, you have to really be careful on that, though, because, I mean, if you do have if you purchase a park and it does have problems, that they're your problems now.
Absolutely, and it gets really expensive, and you can need, again, number one rule in business, always be overcapitalized, so you have some money to deal with some of those issues. But when you have a $500,000 issue that you're not thinking about, that's a big problem.
Now, one of the main goals of buying a property, a mobile home property, is to get that cash flow, right?
Correct.
So let's look at rent. I think what you say one of the mistakes is people don't see, sometimes they don't look at the upside potential or non-potential of being able to charge more rent.
Yeah, and I think the thing with rents more so is like I just bought a park in Raleigh last year. Lot rents were $255. Raleigh's a $395 market. I bumped rents $50 right off the bat. You know, the residents grumbled a little bit, but you know how that is. They grumble about anything.
Yep.
But they knew they still had a good deal, you know, and so that allows you to buy something that maybe at a cap rate or a price you wouldn't do, but because you can bump it $50 on 200 units, that's $10,000 a month. So it's a big difference.
Big cash flow. That's a big
Absolutely.
difference. I'm sure those residents will love to see you come in.
It's, you know,
You're going
it's
to put that money in there. You're going to make it better park in the long run too, aren't you?
Absolutely. And when you're buying it from the seller, they want a big price for it. So you have to justify the price. And obviously we have investors and banks and stuff like that. So it's not just an easy transaction. You always want to be fair with your residents. And even if you think about it, their lot rent's $325 now or whatever it may be.
Pretty good.
Where are you going to live cheaper than
Yeah.
that?
Now you knew the research, and so
Correct.
you knew it was a good deal when you were buying it, and you knew you had some upside. Let's look at the other side. If somebody doesn't do the research and they buy a park where people are already paying too much in rent,
Yeah.
you can't raise the rent more, can you?
Yeah, and it's, you know, prices are high obviously across the board, and especially in the mobile home park space now. And if it's a $400 market and you're buying a park with $395 lot rents already, there's no room to move. So it's going to be very slow growth. Your expenses are going to continue to go up as they always do, and the rent's going to be stagnant.
So what about the coupon clippers you talk about? Tell me about those kind of people.
Well, a lot of people want to buy this, 6 or 7 cap park, and they just feel like, I'll just get that 6 or 7% return, nothing will go wrong. Well, on 30, 40-year-old infrastructure, older parks, people moving in and out, that type of thing, a lot of stuff can go wrong. And I would avoid that. I always buy parks with upside, whether it be low rents or if there's some spaces where you can add some more homes.
Now, I know we're in the Raleigh-Durham area, but our show goes nationally, and so we have a pretty huge population here. Is there a minimum population you should look at before you ever invest in a park?
My feeling is if you're not at 150,000 population, you got to be really careful. A prime example I had is in a town well, Siler City, out 64. I bought a park there. It was a fantastic cash flow park. It worked really well, but all of a sudden, a couple of the big employers shut down, and we struggled for a little bit. I was fortunate to sell that park for basically what I paid for it, but the subsequent owners have unfortunately not been able to do as well.
One idea I had when we've been talking before is, what about a college town? I mean, it wouldn't be bad to live in a mobile, that they get by the stigma of living in a mobile home. But if you're a college student, that's a pretty good deal with low rent too.
Yeah, that's a great point. I actually just talked to a guy who's got a park at the University of Auburn, and he said it's a gold mine park because the parents actually buy the homes, keep them for 3 or 4 years, and then sell them back to you. And a typical home's $5 or $10 grand. The kid lives in it. It's cheaper than paying room and board somewhere else.
And if the parent pays for it, the kid's going to be a little bit more careful because they don't want to have to answer to mom and dad if
Exactly,
something gets messed up there,
exactly.
right? Even though they might have a party or two, they'll clean up at least afterwards. Yep. Now let's look at some reasons why the investment fails. Like if somebody invests in one and it fails, what are some of the things that people really need to look out for there as far as going forward and investing in a mobile home park?
Well, I think from an investment standpoint, if it doesn't go well, you don't have a lot of options to come back on it. So, you really got to stay with the fundamentals. But I think the biggest issue is if the park has a phase 1 that's bad, and if phase 1's in the environmental report, then you really need to stop and not buy it.
Okay, let's talk about the environmental report. What is that, and why is that important for people that are just starting to look at investing in these kind of parks?
Yeah, and the environmental report would apply to any type of real estate investment. A phase 1, you can easily hire a company, usually the bank does, before you're going to make the purchase, and they're going to do a pretty thorough search of the property and see if there's any old storage tanks, if there's runoff from any place. We ran into an issue in a park in Raleigh where there was an old dry cleaners there, and all that
They
cleaning
dump all the
fluid.
chemicals. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that type of stuff is a real big problem. And my rule of thumb is if you have a negative phase 1, which usually leads to a phase 2, and you really find out what's going on, you pretty much got to pass on it.
So some of the parks that are there now are grandfathered in or something. So they're already on a Superfund site where there's a waste dump, but they have a park there and the people are living there. The government won't do anything until a new new purchaser comes in sometimes, or is that when they discover it?
That's a lot of times when they discover it. So, you're the one holding the bag. And
Yeah, that's important not to do that.
Environmental issues get real expensive, and it's really difficult to do. We just put in a new septic system up in Maryland, and it's over in the Eastern Shore, and they're, very diligent about what goes on in Chesapeake Bay area and stuff like that. It took us 2 years just to get the permit.
Wow. So that's something to avoid if you're brand new.
Yeah.
If that's your first investment, that might be your last investment too,
Exactly.
if you're not careful. Any park under an 8 cap, you say. Now, what's that?
Well, cap rate we talk about is NOI, net operating income, which is all your income minus your expenses is your net operating income. And you divide that by a cap rate or the purchase price to get your cap rate. And, historically it was always a 10 cap, and the parks were very heavy cash flow and stuff like that. Cap rates have come way down because interest rates are lower. The market's hot. I'm seeing things go for 5 caps. There was a park in San Francisco area that went for a 3.2 cap,
Wow.
which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But my feeling is it's all about cash flow, and don't buy below an 8 cap unless you can raise rents, $50 right away.
What's the best cap you bought, as a home park like that?
Well, going back to that Raleigh park, it was a 7 cap that I bought, but because I know I'm $150 below rent wise,
You had a
it's
lot
going to be
upside.
it's going to be 10 or 12 cap within
Yep.
a couple years. I typically my best deals obviously were in 2012. I bought a lot of distressed stuff from the banks. That park I was talking about in Maryland, once we get finished with it, we'll probably have $1.4 million into it, and it'll be worth $3.5 million. So
Pretty good investment.
yeah, but it's we know what we're doing, and
It's not going to happen overnight for a lot of people.
took
is it?
2.5 years to get it all together. So
Some of the best investments people make are ones they don't make, aren't they?
yeah, especially, again, environmental is a big no. Be very careful about the infrastructure issues. I've seen big trees growing right through pipes, and you have no idea that stuff happens, but you just got to be careful.
Yeah, the roots will kill the pipes too.
Yeah.
My father-in-law had that happen with a condo he had at the beach, and it was a pain in the butt.
It is.
I mean, they basically had to eventually dig up the pipes and put
yeah.
new ones in.
Yeah.
I mean, the trees don't play. They don't. I mean, they roll the underground.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Now, is there a checklist or something people that are watching can at least download, or can they? Is that in your book, or how do they get started and learn all these aspects here? Because this is very important. And if you swim in the shark tank, you can get eaten real quick if you don't know what you're doing.
Absolutely, yeah. You can get my book on Amazon, obviously, and I go through the checklist and all that stuff. And you can also go to MainStreetMillionaire.com. We have all the forms and checklists and stuff like that. I really like the boot camp that my friends Frank and Dave do. I'd highly recommend that. They've brought a lot of people into the business. Obviously, we're talking about doing some boot camp stuff. You really need to learn, find a mentor before you really get into this, because if you make a mistake in your first deal, it's not going to be a fun investment.
Well, there's a lot to learn out there, folks. Again, the Unconventional Wealth Show is sponsored by Mike Conlon, who is the author of the Unconventional Wealth book. You can buy it on Amazon. Mike, thanks for your time today.
Hey, thanks for having me.